Hello, folks. Welcome to our workshop. My name is Ron Karsten. I'm the Director of Public Programs for the Theosophical Society in Portland. Please mute your microphone, silence your electronic devices like the phones, and hold on to your questions until our speaker has concluded her presentation in this hour. Our speaker today is Clare Goldsberry. She's a well-renowned Theosophist from Arizona. She's a lifelong student of religion and spiritual traditions. When she discovered Buddhism in 1994, she joined the Theosophical Society and soon began to explore the meaning of life. Why are we manifest in this time and space, and how phenomena exist, as well as how your energy follows your thoughts? Clare's been a professional freelance writer most of her adult life and has published 7 books. Her latest book, The Illusion of Life and Death, Mind, Consciousness, and Eternal Being, is available for you, and you can check out her website later. So we're pleased to have Clare today with us to talk about consciousness. And in her previous discussions, she's hit the topic closer and closer to today's session. So she's taken us through 2 preparatory discussions. So here's Clare.
Thank you, Ron. Yes, yep, this is part 3. It's the last of the 3-part series that I developed on my quantum mind class. And it's about consciousness and what consciousness is and how consciousness helps us create the universe that we experience. And I call it, the conscious universe, all is mind. And some people have a hard time grasping that idea of all is mind. And we've kind of gone through things like mind and matter, and what is mind. And now we're looking at consciousness and the fact that truly all is mind. As an aside, I got into a real good discussion one time with a friend who said, she kept talking about the mind of God. And I said, well, let's look at it this way. What if God is mind, nothing but mind? And what implications would that have? It would also give us a way to avoid attributes for God. And it would help us understand that we live in an informed universe, that all is mind, all is this intelligence, you might say. And what implications does that have on our spiritual life? A couple of the books that I reference is The Spiritual Universe by Amit Goswami. And if you've been around Theosophy for a number of years, you might have had the opportunity to hear Amit Goswami speak. His book also contains a lot of information about the informed universe and intelligent design. I'm also using one by Ervin Laszlo, who's a quantum physicist, The Immortal Mind, Science and Consciousness Beyond the Brain. And that's a very good book. I recommend Ervin Laszlo's books because they're so readable. He's an excellent writer, and he helps make that connection between quantum physics and Eastern philosophies. And a third one that I recommend is The Spectrum of Consciousness by Ken Wilber. He wrote that book about 30 years ago, but it's still very relevant to today. And it was one of the first books that actually took a look at consciousness and what is it, and how do we connect on all levels of consciousness, because consciousness is not just one thing in one area, but it's many levels of consciousness. And also there's a really good book by Gary Lockman, who's become one of my favorite authors. He writes a lot of books, history books. And this one's called A Secret History of Consciousness. Very good book. I love Gary Lockman. I love his writings. He's a Brit, and he teaches. Actually, he was one of the founders of the rock band Blondie, and I think he was the either the bassist or the drummer, maybe the bassist. He also has a PhD in, I think, mathematics. He's great. Oh, wonderful writer. I highly recommend Gary Lachman. Okay, so here we go. So what is consciousness? And what does it mean to be conscious in this world that we call reality? We're going to explore that a little bit. And perhaps what we live in is not so much a world of reality, but it is a world of mind. It is nothing but mind. When we look at the Eastern philosophies, as along with the quantum physicists and some of today's popular teachers of consciousness theory, such as B. Alan Wallace and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, and David Chamberlain, who worked with Dr. Hameroff at the University of Arizona when they developed the Department of Consciousness Studies. And you look at this and you think, okay, how did they get interested in this? Well, Stuart Hameroff was a doctor, an anesthesiologist at the University of Tucson Medical Center. And he noticed that as he would put people under, he would put them under very deeply, so that they could have surgery. And when they would come out of their anesthesia, he noticed something really strange, and that is they were not unconscious. They were very conscious, as a matter of fact. They were aware of what was going on while they were like out of their body. It was almost like an out of body experience. And many times they would be up in one corner of the surgical room, looking down, watching Dr. Hameroff and the surgeon perform their work. There was one person that actually went outside and was sitting on the roof, on the edge of the roof of the hospital, and was seeing lots of ambulances come in. And they were telling Dr. Hameroff that this is what they were seeing. And so he began thinking about this idea that what we call unconscious is not really unconscious at all, that we are always conscious on some level. In fact, the entire universe is imbued with consciousness. Everything has consciousness. Plants have consciousness. If you can remember the experiments that were done, I think it was a Japanese scientist, and he would put plants in different rooms, and in some rooms he would play rock music or heavy metal. In other rooms he would play classical music like Mozart or Bach or Beethoven. And he happened to notice that in the rooms that had really loud, very almost offensive kinds of music, the plants didn't grow as well as the plants did that were in rooms that were more quiet, nice music, very rhythmic, harmonious music. And so he began to look at the idea that plants are conscious. And so there's been a lot of work done on that, about how consciousness is connected through all things. And we'll talk a little bit about the theory of non-locality that Rupert Sheldrake proposes, that our consciousness is what really connects us all. Our consciousness is what creates that unity that helps us all to be on the level of one. So consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain. We know that. It's something that's pervading the whole universe, and it is in all living systems. Joy Mills one time said in a talk that I heard in person back at Olcott, that all is rooted in consciousness. And I've always remembered that. And I always thought that was an amazing thing, that all is rooted in consciousness. And in a talk he gave on the origins of awareness, Rabbi Samuel Cohen, who was an associate of Dr. Stuart Hameroff, said that everything in the world has a latent potential for consciousness. Consciousness is part of the fabric of space-time, the very material of creation of all existence. And I think that's very meaningful, this latent potential for consciousness, that, maybe even rocks are conscious, things that we think of as being inanimate, they maybe have a consciousness. And so we're really looking at that at this point. Conscious is not something that's created, but it exists as energy fields. And some call it the Akashic field, in which all the potential for matter, in fact, for everything, is contained. And this Akashic field is sometimes what people refer to as the informed universe. It's this energy, this intellect, maybe even like the Buddhic energy in the Akashic field. Consciousness, it used to be seen as part of the brain, but consciousness no longer is seen as a brain epiphenomenon, but as the ground of being in which all material possibilities, including the brain, are embedded. And we talked a lot about mind and matter in the first one, and we can see that the brain is what obviously is connected to the nervous system and allows the senses to operate. But then consciousness can exceed the brain. In fact, consciousness can exist without a brain. And we know that people who have even passed on, people who have died, others can feel their consciousness. They can be conscious of what we're doing here. You don't need a body or a brain to be conscious. It exists on all levels. And that's from Amit Goswami's The Physics of the Soul, another really good book by Amit Goswami. So where is consciousness? Well, consciousness is non-local. It exists everywhere and in everything. And Rupert Sheldrake has done a lot of work with this idea of consciousness and non-locality. Some of the experiments he's done is really interesting. There's a YouTube video that you can watch that looks at when dogs know that their owners are coming home. And it's really interesting because he does several experiments on dogs and their owners, and how the owner leaves for work, and then how when it's getting time for the owner to come home, this dog knows it. The dog knows that the owner is on their way, and the dog gets all excited, and the dog starts looking out the window. And he's done different experiments with different people, whether are you late coming home from work? And the dog seems to know that, and the dog doesn't get excited until you actually do start coming home from work. And I would even say it's not just dogs. I had a cockatiel once that always knew when I was coming home, or when my significant other, Brent, when he was coming home. He was actually more in tune to Brent, and he would just start chirping and tweeting and just going crazy. And pretty soon, a couple minutes later, I'd hear the garage door come up and Brent would be home. So I think that even things we think of as not having a high level of intelligence, and of course we know birds do have a high level intelligence, but all things can sense, because there's this conscious connection that we experience with each other. All matter is conscious. Consciousness is not divorced from matter. And I think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially if, they say, well, the plant is conscious, our rock's conscious. And what about just everyday matter? What is conscious? And perhaps, consciousness is imbued in all matter. In fact, some of the quantum physicists say that it is not divorced from matter. Consciousness transcends the material universe. And again, the idea that after we die, we're still on a level of consciousness. We can experience the consciousness of our loved ones who died. And a lot of people, mediums and so forth, have this gift of experiencing this consciousness of people with whom they are very closely related. So all possibilities are within consciousness. And we know that the the mind, the mind out there, the all that is, the Akashic field contains all possibilities and all probabilities. And everything is contained in this, this intelligent universe, or within the consciousness of the universe. Consciousness is awareness. And sometimes when you ask people, well, what is consciousness to you? And they might say, well, consciousness is being aware. If I'm awake, I'm conscious. If I'm asleep or if I'm under anesthesia, well, then I'm not conscious. And they pretty much associate consciousness with awareness. And that's kind of where it ends. And certainly awareness is the ability to perceive phenomena and then give meaning to that perception. Conscious awareness allows us to not only encounter things with our senses or experience the phenomenal world with our senses, but also to give meaning to what it is we are seeing or hearing or tasting or feeling. And so we are consciousness. Consciousness is not something we have. I am conscious. No, we are consciousness, which is this eternal state of awareness on many levels. We are always conscious. We are never not conscious. And I think that's important to remember, especially as we experience and go through and study these various levels of consciousness. When we talk about consciousness, we can talk about mind. And of course, mind, we know, is not a part of the brain. Mind doesn't have any form. It has no, you can't open up somebody's brain. As Dr. Hammeroff decided, you can't open up somebody's skull to do a brain surgery and find something in there that they call the mind. Oh, there's the mind. Oh, yes, now we know. There is no such thing in the brain as mind. But there are three forms of mind, and we have what we call the gross mind. And that's the waking consciousness of the physical being, the sensory mind. It's what responds to our five senses and even our sixth sense. It is also the deluded mind. In other words, while we have this gross mind and we can see all this phenomenon, we can even understand that we've created all the phenomenal universe, that things aren't just sitting out there waiting for us to observe them, but they are actually created in the mind by the mind, because nothing has any inherent reality from its own side. And that's something we discussed in class 1 and in class 2. And so it's also what allows us to be deluded into thinking that what we see and what we feel and what we hear, in other words, the material part of the universe is all that exists. And of course, that was the materialist idea several hundred years ago, that the only thing that was real was what you could experience with the five senses. So it also allows us to be deluded into thinking that everything out there is real. That it's solid, that it's permanent, and it's just waiting for us to see it, when that's not true. And that's the great delusion or illusion, is thinking that all of this is reality, when it's not really reality. There is a realer reality. Then we have the subtle mind, and this is the mind of dreaming and also of death. The Dalai Lama has a really good book out called Sleeping, Dreaming, Dying. And that also talks about the various levels of consciousness, especially the mind of dreaming. We all dream. I have people tell me, well, I don't dream. Well, they dream, they just don't remember their dreams. And for some people, that's kind of a hobby, is to try to remember their dreams. And when they wake up, they write down the dreams. There are some theories that our personalities kind of split off during sleep, and we're actually experiencing things on another level of consciousness outside of where we are in this here and now. And so the mind of dreaming is very much a consciousness. When you are dreaming, everything looks very real. If you have a bad dream, if you have a nightmare and you become afraid and things are just going wild, that's real. And that's a level of consciousness. And then death, when the deluded mind drops away during death. And we know that there's no inherent reality in the phenomenal objects that the gross mind misapprehended as real. Then there's the very subtle mind, and this is the mind that endures after the death process is complete. It's also called the clear light or emptiness mind that resides in the Bardo state. And this is a mind of non-duality. It's on that level of this very subtle mind that we realize that the mind, the very subtle mind, is totally and completely non-dual. We don't see you, me, self and other, light and dark. You see everything exactly as it exists. And how does it exist? It exists as emptiness. Emptiness is the nature of all phenomena. And so this emptiness mind resides in the Bardo state until rebirth. And that's, of course, obviously, according to the Eastern philosophies. There's 3 levels of consciousness. There's the Atma, and it pervades all, kind of like sunlight. It is the supreme principle in man and the life source in all other forms. It's kind of like the animating principle. And then there's the Buddhi, the vehicle of Atma, the highest intuitional self, where the inner voice comes from, the source of power of certain knowledge, as opposed to the intellect's discovery. If anybody has ever heard their inner voice, I think we all do at some time. Maybe we just don't call it that. I first heard my inner voice when I was 10 years old. And I was sitting back in my thinking tree, which was this great big sycamore tree that branched out over the creek on our farm. And I was sitting there in the tree pondering what I might be when I grew up. And in thinking about that, all of a sudden, this voice came, and it was a very audible voice, but it wasn't an external audible voice. It was an internal audible voice. And it said, "You're going to be a writer, Claire." And I said, "Wow, that's very cool. I think I could be a writer. I love to read. I think I'm called to be a writer." And so often if you need information, if you have something you're really pondering, listen for that inner voice. Learn to listen for this Buddhi, this inside, this inner consciousness, really. It comes from inside that gives you certain knowledge that you need to know or certain direction, and listen for that inner voice. It's something that's very, very helpful for sure in life. And then there's the Manas, and that's the seat of self-consciousness. And self-consciousness, obviously, is the idea that we are self-aware. Human beings are at the highest level of their self-awareness. Animals are self-aware to a certain extent, but animals operate obviously more from intuition. Insects, I would say, operate from a level of intuition, but they're lower in this consciousness level than, say, even animals are. Animals are, they're aware of danger. They become fearful. They experience pain, but they don't have this idea of I. I am going to do this. They can't make choices. And our self-consciousness allows us to make choices, to see ourselves, to know ourselves, and make choices. It's the mental continuum. Buddhism calls it the mental continuum. And this mental continuum is the seat of stored up memory, not seat. Made an error there, a typo. The seat of stored up memory, or our store consciousness. Some people call it the storehouse. And it's in this storehouse that all of past error and experience which reincarnates from life to life on man's pilgrimage to enlightenment. In other words, everything that we've ever known, done, experienced is in our store consciousness. And that's why I think, I don't know if you've ever had the idea, you just be going along living life and all of a sudden something and you'll go, oh my goodness, you have this deja vu moment, like, oh my goodness, I've been here before. I've seen that before. And it maybe is just a fleeting thing, but that is this storehouse where, some little memory pops up into your mind and you remember something. And it's all of those which reincarnate from life to life on our pilgrimage to enlightenment. So what does consciousness do? Well, consciousness enables the wave function to collapse into particles we call matter. Thus, consciousness creates matter. And in class 1, we talked about mind into matter, or mind and matter, how you can't have one without the other. And matter, we know from the quantum physics point of view, appears in two forms. You've got the wave function and a particle function. And the wave function is the potential. We say that when the wave function is enabled, everything is in potentiality or in potentia. And once it is observed, then consciousness by a conscious observer, it enables this wave function to collapse into particles. So it goes from waves to particles that we call matter. And so that's how consciousness or the mind creates matter. Consciousness also enables individuation or individualization. Consciousness is what gives us this idea of duality, the idea that I am me and you are you, or self and other. In higher levels of Buddhism, they say that meditators can actually get to a point where there is no individuation, that self and other don't stay as separate beings, but actually become one, that self and other are not different. And so consciousness really helps us to become the individuals that we are. And it gives us this duality. But on higher levels of consciousness, we can exceed that duality. We can move beyond or transcend that duality into non-duality. Consciousness manifests and differentiates our perceptions through 3 modes of perception. So manifestation is a function of consciousness. And when we say something is manifest, that means we are able to experience it. If something is manifest, well, we can see it, we can experience it, we can feel it, we can get feelings about it, maybe we can touch it. But manifestation, everything is manifest through consciousness. And that's why even after death, although we may not see the person who has died, that person is not manifest, but that person's consciousness still exists. And these 3 modes of perception help us to understand what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, because perception exists differently for each one of us. Some of us have different perceptions about everything than others do. And so we each have our own perception. Consciousness constructs the classical world, according to quantum physicist Fred Alan Wolf. And he's also the quantum physicist that has my favorite saying. He says, there is no out there. Because on a certain level of consciousness, we understand that nothing exists out there inherently from its own side. There is no out there. Everything is created in the mind by the mind, and nothing has any inherent reality from its own side. And what do we mean by the classical world? Well, Consciousness creates the conceptual world, or the world made of concepts that we call reality. And so the classical world, again, it's like the classical materialists who said, well, everything exists. It's all out there. It's all there just waiting for us to come here from wherever, our previous life or the Bardo state or heaven or wherever, and see all this stuff. And that's really a misconception. It's called misapprehension. Buddhists call it misapprehend the phenomenal world, because it's a world of concepts that we create and perceive. We create it in the mind by the mind. And so these concepts are created from, they have form, they have function, we name them, and we call it reality. This is real. And that's kind of what our consciousness helps us do. So it's good to have this gross, waking, conscious mind, because we can certainly learn a lot if we pay attention. So what does consciousness do? Okay, we'll continue this and say, all right, it chooses. And choosing is collapsing. Again, we go back to that idea that the wave function collapses into particles. And so when we choose, and every time we look at something out there, in here, we are choosing, we are collapsing. We are collapsing the waves into particles. Collapsing is the manifestation of physical, vital, mental, and even supramental bodies. And it occurs only with this quantum collapse. Consciousness is responsible for recognizing and choosing manifest actuality from all the possibilities of physical, vital, mental, and supramental that it has available for experiencing that actuality moment to moment. And remember that what we're experiencing, this idea of moment to moment, think about the movie projector. And I think we talked about it in class 1, but I'll just review it a little bit. You think of an old time movie projector that had reels, and it had a reel of film. And these film consists of frames of pictures. And individually, these frames are still. They're just frame, frame, frame. When you put that reel into a projector and start it up, and the film runs through with light shining behind it. See, light's very important to the idea of consciousness and creation. And the light shines through it. What happens is, we see not frame by frame by frame, but we see the movement. And all of a sudden, these frames become not just the individual frame, but it becomes movement. It becomes the picture. It becomes what we see as a continual movement, a continual story. And it operates the same way when we look at phenomena. When we're collapsing the waves into particles, we can say, okay, we collapse the waves into particles because we've chosen, and now the wave goes from wave to particle, wave to particle, wave to particle, and it does so in minute milliseconds. It does so fast, just like a movie. It goes so fast, you don't realize you're looking at frame, frame, frame. You think you're looking at this motion that's just moving. And that's the way we operate in the physical universe. We don't see this, that I'm choosing this, then this, then this, but it all looks like it's one big long film strip and it's moving. And so it actually turns the potentiality for being what it is into the actuality of what we see as reality. So you can think of it as going from potentiality to actuality, and then what we call reality. But we can understand that reality isn't real. So manifestation, I'll talk a little bit about that again. All manifestations we apprehend in the 18 elements of being are in the 3 fields of things in themselves. And if anybody's ever studied Kant, Kant was a big believer in things in themselves. He always wanted to know, how do things exist? And things in themselves are the things that exist inherently. My keyboard is a thing in itself, and there's only this keyboard, that's it. Then there are representations or things that represent other things. Maybe the computer represents images on a screen, and there we come to mirror images. What's on the computer is not a thing in itself, it's an image, it's representation. And so we have these ideas again that, Kant's philosophy's kind of been blown out of the water by Eastern philosophies, in that nothing exists as a thing in itself. But in the nature of phenomenon, there is nothing but emptiness. Everything is empty of inherent existence. We have to remember that it doesn't mean that things don't exist. Things exist. They don't exist in the way that we believe they do, or think they do, or are being fooled into thinking they do. They're representations, they're mere images. So all manifestations bear the mark of both individual and collective consciousness. There's things that we can see as individuals and perceive as individuals that are very different from the way others perceive them or see them. And then there's the collective consciousness. And that is when, obviously, a group of people see things in a certain way. A group of people perceive certain things. Collective consciousness would be, say, a religious group. You look at cults. Cults very much play into that collective consciousness, where often in religion, and especially in the Theosophical Society, we may all think a little bit differently about our spiritual life, or the religions we grew up with, and science and so forth. But cults have this a really unique collective consciousness where everybody truly becomes programmed to believe in the same way. And that's an idea where collective consciousness can actually be destructive. It can actually be very negative. But no manifestation of phenomenon are purely individual or purely collective. And I thought that was really interesting. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about that in his book, Understanding the Mind. And I think that's important to remember, that nothing's purely individual. I've been influenced by things I was taught. That's how we teach children to know things. That's a cow, that's a horse, that's your brother, that's your sister, that's a church, that's a house. And so there are no purely individual things, nor are there purely collective manifestations, because everything is kind of a mixture of both. That we need to remember, that nothing is purely individual or purely collective. So we have to, and that's really what involves all this sorting out. We sort out the things that we believe, the things that we perceive, the things that we think as phenomena, arises and falls away, and we realize what things are, and we realize the emptiness of all things. Meditation is a form of consciousness that means a lot to various people. I've never been a very good meditator. I've always said, I don't know, I'm a better contemplator than I am a meditator. But I have even had experiences in contemplation that I think would qualify as well. But meditation is an experience of a different level of consciousness. And I think that maybe all of us have had some experiences from time to time. And I think we can have these experiences even while we're not meditating, or even while we're not contemplating. I know an experience that I had, oh boy, it's been almost 30 years ago now. I was walking my dog one evening, it was in April, and all of a sudden things got very bright. And granted, I live in Phoenix, and we have a lot of sunshine, and April, is beautiful. We have a lot of flowers coming out on the trees, and blue sky, but it seemed inordinately bright. The green trees on the street just seemed inordinately green. And I remember looking at the sky thinking, that sky is so blue. And suddenly everything just went clear. It wasn't white. It wasn't like you saw clouds or, a white foggy sky. It was this clear light, almost like when we mentioned earlier, like the clear light of death, this clear light. And it was, and there was nothing else that I was experiencing, nothing. I heard no cars. I heard, nothing. I didn't see anything else. It was just this clear light. And then it's like as quickly as it came, it left. And my dog was sitting on the sidewalk looking at me rather strangely, like, where did you go? And I've never forgotten that experience. And I've never had anything like that when I have, been working on meditation. But I think that those experiences are open to us. And it's a different level of consciousness that we can be allowed to experience. Meditation allows us to experience this gap between here and there. And I think that's important because we're not always here. There is no here, really. And what is there? We don't even know what there is. But there's this gap between here and there, between the thoughts that we have and the sudden realization that there is no thought. That's this gap between thought and no thought. And I know people say, well, thought creates your reality. We talked about that in class too. How thinking, when you're thinking, and thoughts create your reality. And yet there is this gap between thought and no thought that allows us to experience something totally different. I wrote an essay once on beyond thought to no thought and how that might help us experience this idea of this middle kind of consciousness that we can't be conscious of on any other level. Meditation can help us know what is real and separate it from the unreal. And I think it would take a lot of work. I've read about the experiments that they've done on meditators, and what is real. From the voice of the silence tells us, to know the real from the unreal. The mind, let the mind slay the slayer. And that really is just the idea that what we think is real is not real. And what we think is unreal is likely the only reality there is. And I think that requires a lot of contemplation and even some meditation. It's very interesting. There's a lot about that sort of thing in the voice of the silence. The Apostle Paul said in the New Testament, we see through a glass darkly. And I think that was a very good description of how we experience consciousness in the phenomenal world. We see through a glass darkly. We don't know reality. We can't see it for what it really is with our gross waking consciousness. So we see through this glass darkly, and we get glimpses. We see shadows, kind of like Plato's shadows on the cave wall. We see shadows, but ultimately, this is where we get our delusions about what reality is, and what's the difference between this phenomenal world we call reality and the realer reality that we can experience on higher levels of consciousness. Okay, so unity of consciousness. David Bohm said, and David Bohm, if you've never seen David Bohm's Conversations with Krishnamurti, the Theosophical Society ran that video, and it's been a little while ago, it was within the last year anyway, and it's really good. If you get a chance to watch that, watch it. You can buy a book that is a transcription of their conversation that's very good as well. But David Bohm said, deep down, the consciousness of mankind is one. This is a virtual certainty because even in the vacuum, matter is one. If we don't see things, it's because we are blinding ourselves to it. So when people say things like, we are one, and they throw that around, I hear so many people, you can walk into, almost any church or spiritual meeting or philosophy class or whatever, and you hear this idea that we are one. We're all one. And yet, what does that mean? So deep down, the consciousness of mankind is one because all is mind. The entire universe is nothing but mind. Even, as he says, even in the vacuum, matter is one. Because remember, it's existing in waves. It's wave function. So it's all one. The only time it becomes different than one, when it goes from non-dual one to duality, is when we observe it and it collapses the waves into particles. Now we have duality. Now we've eliminated unity and we have duality. Erwin Schrödinger said that consciousness is not plural. All beings share the same consciousness. And here's where we get the idea that all is mind, that all beings share that same consciousness. And that kind of goes back to the story about Rupert Sheldrake I referred to earlier, where even your pets, your animals, other people, how many times have you been thinking about somebody going, oh my goodness, I wonder how this person's doing it. And all of a sudden the phone rings and it's them. I kind of had an eerie experience yesterday. I hadn't heard from this friend for a long time. We were business associates for years. He was a great guy, lived here in the same area, and he always had parties, and he was a fun guy. He was really a great guy. And so I knew him for like 30 years. And in 2020, he moved back to Wisconsin, where he was originally from. And he entered an assisted living home because he was not, he just needed help, being cared for. He had had a couple of ankle surgeries and that were kind of botched, and he couldn't walk, and it was kind of sad. And so I really hadn't thought about Bernie in a long time. And yesterday, all of a sudden, Bernie popped into my mind. And I'm like, oh, Bernie, my goodness. I wonder how he is. I wonder, I haven't heard from him in a long time. Even on Facebook, I haven't heard from him. And so I had this feeling that maybe he was not alive. He was about 5 years older than me. And so, being older, well, what can we expect? We get older, And so I Googled his name and obit, and it came up. And, it was just weird. I thought, well, maybe he wanted me to know that he had died. Obviously, his family back there and so forth, they wouldn't know me. They, we got to contact Claire and let her know Bernie died. They wouldn't know that. But I think it was like Bernie telling me Claire, I've died. Look it up. And I did. And so we all share this same consciousness, whether it's our pets, whether it's our friends, people we love. We all share this same consciousness, this deep down consciousness, that you really can't experience out here when you're just looking at the duality of things and you're aware, but you're not really aware on this deep level. That it's what is one is the consciousness of mankind is one. And that's even connected to the animals and the plants. I mean, consciousness is pervasive. Consciousness is pervasive. It's in everything. All is consciousness. Just like we say, all is mind. And of course, we've talked about consciousness creating matter. And I thought this was interesting. It's from Sri Aurobindo's book, The Life Divine. A fascinating book. It only took me about almost a year to get through it because it's so deep and so amazing that I could get through about 3 pages in a sitting, taking notes and everything. But Sri Aurobindo says that the physical foundation of matter remains, but matter can no longer be the foundation of consciousness. In other words, it's not that out there that tells us we are conscious. We are conscious and we are creating that out there. So those things out there are not what make us conscious. We are conscious, and so we create everything in the phenomenal world. The foundation of the developing existence will be the new spiritual status above, or the unveiled soul status within us. It is a flow of light and knowledge and will from above, and a reception from within that will determine the reactions of the being to cosmic experience. So it's this flow of light and knowledge, maybe the buddhi, the will from above. What gives us the will? What gives us the will to live? What gives us the will to create? We all have this will to create. Every time we look, we are creating. And it's from that will determine the reactions of the being to the cosmic experience that we all experience. We all have these cosmic experiences. And it's important that we keep these things close and understand that consciousness is key on many different levels. And don't get locked into this idea that the only consciousness we have is this awareness. It's much more than just this awareness of the phenomenal world. Consciousness as ultimate mind. All is mind and mind is all. Matter exists as potentiality in all phenomena and is a product of mind, of our thoughts, perceptions, and impressions. And all of those go into this storehouse we call mind. All of this remains with us throughout all of our lifetimes. And we learn from it all, and we become on the path to enlightenment, whatever that is for each one of us, this enlightened mind, and which is knowing that all is one, that consciousness exists throughout everything, that consciousness is what makes us one. And so consciousness is really key to being able to understand mind and matter and thoughts and how thoughts create things. And we have to know this. And I think it's so important that we study this. And the more you read, there are many books out there. I could give you a bibliography of 30 books that has all just been so helpful to me in my study of this, and why I'm so excited about teaching this, because it's just amazing stuff. And it helps us understand the world. It helps us not to get so depressed over things that go on around us, but to realize that consciousness is what we create. We created with our consciousness all that we experience. And I think it gives us a little more hope that things out there don't have to be out there, that we can create all things within here, and that we can make things different. We can see things differently. And maybe that's what gives us our peace of mind, our hope that mind is all and all is mind. And I will send along a bibliography for these classes. So if you want to read some of the books that I've read, oh, it's amazing stuff. And I really appreciate Ron and the Portland Theosophical Society Lodge for inviting me to do these, because I love it. I hope you all love it too. And I look forward to meeting with you again someday soon. Thank you very much.